بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back everybody to this interesting course on the rise of the novel. I insist on calling it interesting because it is really interesting. When you read about the demerits and disadvantages of the novel in this stage of inception, of beginnings, and then later when you read the modern novel or the 19th century novel, you will see the difference. You will be able to appreciate the novel yourself, to evaluate it and to recognize the strong points and the weaker points. Lecture number 7. I've done this in order to remind you. Okay, I think this is good. Where we stand now. What have we done? In the previous lecture we talked about individualism, materialism, serialization, patronage, prefaces. And in this lecture we'll talk about long titles, sentimentalism, repetition, colonialism, contradiction, the omniscient narrator. Are you ready? Okay. So we said at the end of the last lecture that novels in the 18th century began with prefaces. A preface is a number of pages dealing with other issues away from the fictional course of the novel itself. The writer's main interest was in the publication of the novel. He wanted the novel to be published because it was new and unaccepted and unfamiliar. Also, novels at that time used to carry long titles, very long titles. And if you remember from the other lectures, you saw the pictures of not only Robinson Crusoe but of other novels as well. The titles are very long. Why is that? Again, no experience, you know. Some more disadvantages of Robinson Crusoe: long titles and chapter headings. Also the chapter headings, not just the title of the novel, but the title of the chapter. Full title. Like all other novels in the 18th century, the title page is so long. Now we are talking about Robinson Crusoe. And what we say about Robinson Crusoe also applies to other novels. Okay? So the title page is so long. Why is it so long? Please follow this with me. It is long because the writer wants to, number one, make the novel interesting to readers. So readers would look at the title page of the novel and find it to be quite interesting. So from just having a quick look at the market of books and finding that title page or cover page full of interesting information, that would be an asset, that would be a boost to the reader who would buy the novel. So writers thought. They also wanted to prove that it is not a novel but just a history or some adventures. People, don't worry, rest assured, this is not a novel. You hate the novels. We understand that you do not welcome the novel right now. At this stage, at the rise of the novel, the new genre, the novel, is not acceptable. So don't worry at all. I'm not giving you a novel. It's a history or some adventures. Remember the 4 boxes? Okay? They call the novels adventures, they call them history or tales or travels, as in Gulliver's Travels, to prove that it is not a novel but just a history or some adventures. To make sure the reader will buy the book using illustrations and explanations. Not just words, not just Robinson Crusoe. No, Robinson Crusoe with a menu, a list of words, a list of descriptions, a list of sentences describing the title, plus on the other left-hand corner, for example, you have a picture. Okay, like this. The life and strange adventures, surprising adventures of Robinson Crusoe. You understand? And you read all this, and you have the picture of that man who is unfamiliar to the world of the British people at that time. The writer thought that by giving readers such a kind of title, they would be interested and then buy the novel. We couldn't read the title in the picture that I have just displayed, so I have written it here. See, a very long title actually. The life, not just Robinson Crusoe. Where is Robinson Crusoe here? There. It should be Robinson Crusoe instead of full title, and this is the subtitle. The life and strange, surprising adventures of Robinson Crusoe of York. He comes from York. What does he work as? Mariner, who lived 28 years, 28 years, all alone in an inhabited island on the coast of America, near the mouth of the great river of Oronoque, having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account, a description, how he was at last as strangely delivered by pirates, written by himself. This story, these adventures, are written by himself, that is to say Robinson. So if they are written by Robinson, where does Daniel Defoe come? Where does he belong? Do you understand? Tries as much as possible. Daniel Defoe tries as much as possible to distance himself from the narrative, to say, I have nothing to do with it, I'm just the editor, as he said in the other slide. I'm the editor of that account. I have just rewritten it or modified it. A very long title indeed. Now you cannot find that title in modern novels, of course. Titles of chapters are also lengthy, very long chapters. And instead of saying chapter 1 and then chapter 2 and then chapter 3, the writer would say chapter 1, it is a demerit, it's a disadvantage of course, like this. There are illustrations, as you can see, pictures. Here is what I'm referring to as titles and subtitles of chapters. Book 1, Chapter 1, the author dies, meets with Mercury, and is by him conducted to the stage which sets out for the other world. What have you noticed, ladies and gentlemen? What have you noticed here? The writer does not only write chapter 1 or chapter 2 or chapter 3. No, after the number of the chapter, he gives us a short description of what the chapter is going to talk about. And he refers to the author, which is a vague word that we are going to explain later. But what I'm interested in here, this is a novel by Henry Fielding, A Journey from This World to the Next. The same happens also in Robinson Crusoe. Chapter 1 and then a description. Chapter 2 and then a description. Okay? Here, there is sentimentalism, the other point, sentimentalism. Before I explain sentimentalism, I would like to remind you of what we are doing in this lecture, talking about some more disadvantages of the novel, plus patronage and plus writing prefaces and serialization and the other things that we talked about in the other lecture 6. In lecture 7 we talked right now about long title pages and chapter titles. What is sentimentalism? It comes from the word sentiment until here, and then this is an adjective, sentimental, and this is ISM, which means that it is a movement, a school of thought that has exponents, leaders, and that has also followers, right? Sentimentalism. Writers who used that current in their novels, that trait, used a lot of crying. And this is the definition of sentimentalism. It means a lot of crying and tears on any occasion. Tears and crying usually come to people on certain occasions, not on all occasions. If there are tragic scenes, for example, death, touching situations or scenes, and ladies are known to be much more able to cry than men, of course, but in the 18th century novel, with the rise of the novel, crying was used all the time. Why was it used? That would be a very simple and logical question. Why did writers use crying in that way? They wanted to touch the reader. They wanted the reader to be affected. But of course, there is an adjective in English, it is affected. That is to say, not real. The crying that was used in plenty in the novels of the 18th century was affected. Most of the time, it was not real. Men and women are described as shedding tears all the time, crying all the time, on any occasion. That, of course, would be something silly. It is not needed, it is not necessary, it is not real. If he wants the novel to be real, there are no people on earth who are seen to be crying all the time. They do cry, but on certain occasions, not on all occasions. It is, again, is verisimilitude. We talked about verisimilitude before. Realism, the realism of the novel. It is against it, because in reality, no man or woman cries that way. It is one of the common features of the novel in the 18th century, one of the disadvantages, not only in Robinson Crusoe, but in other novels. There is a novel called Sentimental Journey and Sentimental Education, Éducation Sentimentale by Flaubert. It is common. This is not touching all the time. Crying is touching. It is effective. It touches the heart, but not all the time. It is not touching when it is not sincere. If it is sincere, then it can touch you. It could be insincere. That kind of crocodile tears is not all the time sincere. An example is Robinson's parents early in the novel. Early in the novel, his parents talk to him about staying at home, getting married, getting all the education that he needs, and then they cry. He talks and then he cries. He sits alone and cries. He talks to other people and then cries. Sleeps and cries, wakes up and cries. It is not sincere. The reason behind repetition, now this is another point, repetition. One of the characteristics of the novel also at that time. Repetition, the writer repeating himself. Remember when I talked to you before today about serialization in lecture 6? Serialization. The novel was divided into, say, 30 or 40 sections. Each section was published one at a time. Today, I will publish section number 3. In another 2 weeks, I will be publishing section number 4. Section number 5 will be published in another 2 weeks, and so on. What is there to tie all these sections together, to join them together, to combine them together? There is nothing. You understand? So how would the writer convince readers of the story and the plot? He would repeat himself. Every other section or so, the writer began to talk to them about the same things that he talked about before. It is, of course, one of the disadvantages of the novel in the 18th century. Redundancy, repetition. The novel was published in journals, and the writer had to remind readers every time of what has been said before. The writer had no experience of novel writing before, and that is why he could not avoid repetition. Later, with more experienced writers, that kind of repetition is not there, or is not there in the same way it was in the period of the rise of the novel. The more you write novels, the more you read novels, the more you have experience in novel writing, the more you talk about the novel, the more people talk about the novel, the more you get experience and become better in avoiding certain problems. And one of the things that writers could avoid later is repetition, unless of course you are doing it with a purpose. Some writers, even in the 20th century, even in the 21st century, use repetition because it is needed. If it is needed, there is no problem. If it is superfluous, supercilious, if it is not needed, why bring it in the novel? Unless it is, of course, a disadvantage. You understand? Questions? Repetition. Robinson Crusoe is full of redundancy, which means repetition. The answer is, it is full of fun? Of course not. Full of irony? Of course not. Full of repetition. So the word redundancy is the same as the word repetition. Redundancy is the same as repetition. Is redundancy or repetition good or bad? Redundancy is an advantage in Robinson Crusoe, a disadvantage in Robinson Crusoe, or vague in Robinson Crusoe. I will leave the answer to you. Repetition is not a good thing even in language. If as a teacher I keep repeating myself, which I do, then you're not going to like it very much. But I do repeat myself in order to explain more and to clarify and to make myself clearer. If I'm sure that you understand quickly, and I know that you understand quickly, I wouldn't repeat that much. But I'm repeating to emphasize my points and to allow you to understand all that I say. The next point is colonialism. What is colonialism? Read the title, colonialism. What is colonialism? Colonialism means that a country like England, for example, invades another country like Egypt. So Egypt would not be for Egyptians or for Egypt. It would be a British colony. And that happened in the 19th century. In this case, we have two classes of people. We have the colonizer, that is to say the British, and we also have the colonized, the Egyptians. In the same way, you could say the British and the Indians, the British and the Nigerians, the French and the Algerians, the Libyans and the Italians, the Congo and the Belgians. Do you understand? The colonizer and the colonized, the ruler and the ruled. Naturally, if England takes control of a country like India, for example, it would rule it, and the other people in that country will be the ruled, the subject people. Like England invading many parts of Africa and considering those parts of Africa to be vulgar. I've written that word, I've inserted it here because we will need it later. Robinson, of course, represents the British Empire over which the sun never sets. He comes from England, that huge, powerful nation. He goes to Africa and to other parts of the world, and he considers all those people to be vulgar. He alone has knowledge. He alone has superiority. He alone is good, noble, educated, advanced. Do you understand? What about the other people? They are lesser, they are inferior, they are lower, they are savage. Do you get the point now? and the novel, Robinson Crusoe does deal with this issue. He is a young man of 28. He goes out of England and travels to many parts of the world, indeed. But he's alone, and he's a young man. But he considers himself Alexander the Great. He considers himself very superior, as we shall see now. Robinson feels very important as a British citizen. Again, this is the spirit of the age. He is no different. All other people at that time felt the same. It was the age of geographical expansion of the great empire over which the sun never sets. For him, Africans and Arabs and even Muslims, and this is in the novel. I have not given you that word myself. It is in the novel. In the novel, the writer talks about Arabs and Muslims, and before them Africans, as lower classes of people, vulgar people. He is the superior one. For him, for Robinson, they are inferior. He is superior, they are inferior. And that is why I have given you that table, which you will see right now. He is a representative of powerful, rich individuals from England and the empire over which the sun never set in the past. He is a representative of powerful, rich individuals from England. So in dealing with other people, he considers himself better, higher. It would be meaningless and contradictory, of course, if the writer portrayed him as a slave. He is taken as a slave in one part of the novel to the Arabs, but the writer bridges this point, this stage in the life of Robinson Crusoe. He doesn't talk about it, and we'll explain it. That is why in the novel we do not read at all about this period in his life. He can never be a slave. He should be a master all the time. Colonialism. Here is the table I have designed in order to show you the differences between what is African and what is British. What it is to be a servant and what it is to be a master. This is Robinson, and these are people from Africa, like Man Friday. He is the master and others are servants. He is the colonizer and they are the colonized. He is the ruler, they are the ruled. He is the superior one, they are the inferior people. He is upper, they are lower. He is noble because he is Western, because he is Christian, you know. They are savage because they are Eastern, or Arabs, or Muslims, or Moors. These are the words that Robinson Crusoe uses in order to refer to other people from other nations, especially Arabs or Muslims, you know. Because he's Christian, he feels noble and Western and better. He's white, they are black or colored. He is good, they are bad. He has a lot of knowledge, a lot of learning. They have nothing, they are ignorant. He has a lot of experience. He can manage to do anything or to solve any problem. But they are innocent. They know nothing. They have no experience at all. Do you understand? He has a lot of cleverness, but they are good for nothing. They can do nothing. Do you understand? This is something that has to be understood before you read Robinson Crusoe. It's a very important introduction to the novel. Contradiction is another point. Let us see the first slide again. In this lecture, contradiction. So we'll be dealing with contradiction now. Yes. Why do we have contradiction? What is contradiction actually? Contradiction means that I'm saying something and then after a while I say something, and then after a while I say something opposite to it, very different from it. For instance, saying that I have 2 parents, or I have 5 brothers, and after 2 or 3 pages I say I only have 1 brother. Do you understand? A good writer does not forget. A good writer knows what he is saying and does not suffer from that kind of repetition. Most of these disadvantages are due to the fact that writers had no experience in novel writing, which led them to contradict themselves without noticing it. The novel is full of contradiction, which is understandable in the light of the things explained above. As I said, no experience, and that is why we have a lot of contradiction. Examples from the novel. Robinson promises to obey God. I said that today. He promises to his parents that he would stay at home, but then he goes to the sea. He promises to himself that he would obey God and parents, and then obeys only himself. He says that he has close friends, and then after a while he gets rid of them so soon. He doesn't like to have close friends. Visiting Africa to know more about it. This is what he says at the start. Why does he want to visit Africa? We understand that people from England at that time were interested in traveling, exploring, knowing other places, and acquainting themselves with the habits and customs of those people from other countries. This is something that is quite known. But when he goes to Africa, okay, he considers Africa to be inferior and refers to it in a vulgar way. Then he doesn't just want to know more about it, he wants to project himself onto it, to show us the difference between a person coming from Europe and one coming from Africa. Describing the voyage as the most successful one, while we know that it is not. We read of the shipwreck, of the problems, of the various hardships and problems that encountered him on his voyage, and we are surprised to read that Robinson says that it is the most successful one, contradicting himself. The last point in this lecture today, lecture 7, is the omniscient narrator. What is omniscient? The omniscient narrator is the one who knows everything about the novel. The narrator is the person telling us the story, talking to us about everything. He has glasses, and from these glasses, through them, we understand everything else. Okay? Why is Defoe called an omniscient narrator? Omniscient. First of all, the word omniscient means a narrator who knows everything about characters and events. He knows everything. He tells us everything. We do not participate. We just depend on his version, on the way he narrates the events to us. And of course, there is no dialogue. For example, he says, "My father told me such and such. My mother replied in the following manner. My friend told me," using indirect speech. Do you understand? Not giving us real dialogue. So we all depend on the point of view of the author. We do not see the characters in action. We cannot judge them. We cannot judge them because they are not there. They are just relayed, represented to us. He's the one through whose eyes the whole novel is narrated. In the novel, no character speaks for himself or herself. All are given to us from the point of view of the narrator. We are just told about them. He tells us about them. In the novel, there is something called, in the novel in general, there is something called showing and something called telling. A good writer shows. He shows us, he puts characters in front of us in action, and we read what they say, and we judge for ourselves. We depend on ourselves. We do not depend on the author telling us, but here in Robinson Crusoe, the writer prefers to tell us, to explain to us, to affect us, and to tell us what to understand and what not to understand. Do you understand? The same thing with events which are narrated only from the point of view of the narrator, not just characters, but also events. This, of course, is a demerit in novel writing, as it detracts from the reader's right to free judgment. The reader cannot judge the novel or evaluate the novel or understand the novel except from the point of view of the author. True or false? The word omniscient means a narrator who knows everything about characters and events. Yes, true. Using the omniscient narrator is an advantage or a disadvantage or needed in the 18th century novel? It is a disadvantage, of course. As we said at the start, we agreed that we are going to talk about long titles in Robinson Crusoe, and this is a disadvantage. The writer used those long titles in order to sell the novel, and that is why he sacrificed everything else. He even brought some illustrations to the title. Sentimentalism, not emotions and sentiments that are not real at all, which the writer used to describe in the novel, and that was another demerit. Repeating certain pieces of information because the writer was new to the art of the novel and he could not master the various aspects and strands of the novel. Colonialism, as Robinson came from the empire over which the sun never set and felt very important and very powerful and looked at other people from other places as lower and less advanced than he. Contradiction is the same as repetition. The writer could not manage the information he gave us in the novel, so he sometimes said something and then he contradicted himself. I gave you certain examples and we will have more later. The omniscient narrator is the one through whose eyes the novel is narrated. No dialogue, no action. Everything comes to us from the lenses of the author, the narrator. And all these points, plus the other ones we had in lecture 6, are disadvantages of the novel. Of course, the novel has some advantages. Robinson Crusoe as a novel is very interesting. It gives us an interesting topic. It is full of adventure. The language is easy. The writer also talked about England in a roundabout way, but as you can see, the disadvantages are much more than the advantages. Starting from next time, we will be dealing with the novel itself. You have the novel there on the website. You can download it. So we will sum up the chapter and then pick up certain important quotations from each chapter to comment on. From next time, you will need to have much more attention and concentration than you have had so far. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you have enjoyed and benefited from this lecture. Thanks a lot, and see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.